All right. All right, so again, I'd like to officially welcome you to today's webinar about housing in New York. My name is Christine Uno, and I work in the Office of Graduate Marketing and Admissions Consulting. Prior to my role here, I lived and worked in San Francisco, and before that, I worked in residential life and housing services here at NYU. So I have a good deal of experience living in high-rent cities with housing background. I've lived in the Upper East Side in Manhattan and Greenwich Village, as well as in Williamsburg and Greenpoint in North Brooklyn, where I live now. We are also excited to have a great group of current students joining us later in the session to share their experience. Before we jump into the presentation, I'd like to make a land acknowledgement. New York University acknowledges that it is located in ancestral Lenape homelands, and it recognizes the longstanding significance of these lands for the Lenape nations, past and present. We are also conscious that New York City has the largest urban Native population in the United States. We believe that historical awareness of Indigenous exclusion and erasure is critically important and are committed to working to overcome their effects in our own educational institutions. So today's roadmap, here's our agenda. We'll talk generally about the search process, tools, resources, neighborhoods, and factors to consider. Then we'll discuss some of the things you need to know in order to secure an apartment, such as working with a broker, using a guarantor, signing a lease, all those fun things. And then finally, we'll spend some time hearing from current NYU students about their experience relocating and finding housing in New York. And just another reminder for you to ask questions throughout using that Q&A box. As a general disclaimer, the advice we share throughout today is largely based on our own personal experiences. We will share resources that have worked well for us and that are provided on a variety of websites, both through NYU and through the city resources more generally. However, these resources are not officially endorsed or affiliated with NYU. Rather, our goal with today's session is to provide you with a foundation from which you can begin your search process and feel confident navigating that process as you embark on moving to the best city in the world. First, I just want to start by talking broadly about the difference between on-campus and off-campus housing. On-campus housing are residence halls that are either owned or leased by NYU, and they are operated by New York University. These buildings tend to fall within about a 30-block radius or so of Washington Square Park, which is the center of the Manhattan campus. And there are also a few residence halls in Brooklyn at our Brooklyn campus. Undergraduate students, so students who are coming in as first-year undergraduate students, are guaranteed housing, but that is not the case for graduate students. Graduate on-campus housing spots are awarded via an application process that closed a couple of weeks ago in May. You may be able to add yourself to that wait list, but generally speaking, even if you got in before the application closed, chances are really low in terms of securing a spot on campus. We will put a link in the chat with the information for on-campus housing, should you still be interested in pursuing that option. But I do want to acknowledge that we'll be spending today talking about off-campus housing. So off-campus housing are any living arrangements that you have that are unaffiliated with NYU. Even if you find it through an NYU resource, such as the off-campus housing portal that we'll talk about in a moment, it's still considered off-campus housing. There are trade-offs between both. I think there are pros and cons with living on campus and living off campus, but given the reality of the climate and what campus living is like here at NYU, we'll spend today talking about off-campus housing. And so with that, where do you start with your search process? Generally speaking, the best place to start with any big life decision is thinking through your expectations. So really setting your expectations based on your budget and thinking about what you feel you can comfortably afford while you're living and going to school in New York. Consider your source of income during your time as a student. Will you have savings, loans, scholarships, jobs, family support? Use that as a framework to guide you. Think about how you want to spend your time in New York as well. Are you the type of person that likes to spend a lot of time at home? Is your program really demanding? Or are you hoping to make the most of living in New York and embrace New York for all its worth by exploring restaurants and Broadway shows and checking out different neighborhoods? How you plan to live during your time in New York will also impact your budget. these factors will force you to really think about the type of space that you want as well when you're thinking about how do you best situate yourself in your living environment to support your studies. Um, there are several items to consider when you're factoring into your budget. So utilities, generally in New York, with the exception of water, which I find is most often included in the cost of your rent. Utilities are not included in the price of your rent. So often you're responsible for paying for gas, electric, internet, cable, if you're a cable person. And so those are things that you should think about as you're considering your budget. And we have a resource that we'll share in the chat for that as well. Other factors that you should consider, or expenses that you should factor in, are related to the actual move. So how you get from point A to point B from wherever you're living. And we can ask our student panelists a little bit more about their actual moves. And then also furnishing your apartment. When you get here, are you coming with furniture? You can rent furniture. You can buy cheap furniture, you can go secondhand, there's all kinds of options. But some of the things to consider as you begin thinking through your budget. The next step on your search process timeline is thinking about location. So at the same time you're working through your budget, you should also start researching where you want to live in different neighborhoods. Location, as the case is, location is one of the largest impacts on price. And that's particularly so in New York. NYU's Washington Square campus is located in Greenwich Village, which is one of the more expensive neighborhoods in Manhattan. So if you view our Washington Square campus as sort of the center and move a little bit further outward, the price tends to decrease a little bit, or your money will go a little bit further. On this screen here is a recent report from Street Easy, which is a resource we'll highlight in a moment, showcasing or showing neighborhoods for recent grads. Not exactly all of you may be recent grads, but as grad students, you're in sort of this pool of student life. So I thought it was interesting to share in terms of neighborhoods that are deemed affordable. And I know affordability is going to very depend on the person. But these neighborhoods do have some overlap with where we often see NYU students living. And I should note that this map is specific only to New York City neighborhoods, so it doesn't include outlying areas. But in addition to this list, we see students that live in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn, or in more places in South Brooklyn, which is closer to the downtown Brooklyn campus. And then there are also a number of students who live in New Jersey. There are neighboring areas that are really convenient and accessible via the PATH train, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. As well as in Westchester, which is a neighborhood an area just north of the city, or on Long Island, which is a little bit further out from New York City. And then lastly, the type of neighborhood that you find desirable will also depend on your personal circumstances and what you want your New York City experience to be. So when you're thinking through your New York City experience and the neighborhood that you want, every neighborhood has its own personality. So students with families are likely going to be looking for a slightly different neighborhood than a student straight from undergrad, for example. I find that in the initial research phase, blogs and social media can be a really great resource for this, because it changes so much from neighborhood to neighborhood. If it's something that's really important to you, the vibe, the culture, the resources in that particular neighborhood, it's worth spending some time reading through some of those things in terms of, what's available, what's the type of neighborhood, are there playgrounds around, are there bars around, are there restaurants, coffee shops, whatever's important to you. And I think using Google Maps can be a really valuable resource in helping you figure out exactly where you want to be located. So thinking about when you're also factoring in addition to neighborhood vibe, thinking about your time on campus and where your classes are, make sure you research where your program is. Know where they have most of their classes. Not all of our classes happen right on the Washington Square campus. So it's worth reaching out to your program to see, actually, all my classes are in Midtown, or they're in the Med Quarter, which is closer to the east side. And then utilizing Google Maps to figure out how your commute will be to campus. If you are in the area or you're searching for apartments and and you're able to do the commute in real time, I think that's great. But I also find that Google Maps, for me, is something that I particularly use, is really valuable in getting a sense of how long it'll take you to get to and from a place. This map here highlights all of the subway stations that are near the Washington Square campus. Which really does a good job of illustrating just how many lines come within walking distance to a lot of NYU classes. What's not shown on here are the PATH trains to New Jersey, which are also really convenient. Grand Central is very accessible from a lot of train stations, particularly the 456 from campus, which would connect you to Long Island or to Westchester. And then Port Authority Bus Terminal, also really accessible with more connections to New Jersey. So in addition to public transportation, which is how most New Yorkers get around, the city is extremely pedestrian friendly, allowing New Yorkers to walk or bike as another form of transportation. So, and as well, members of NYU have access to the shuttle bus, which travels between various locations on campus. The last thing when you start thinking through your search process is really considering your wants and your must-haves. And this one I think is particularly tricky for some non-New Yorkers to wrap their head around when you're starting to really narrow down the type of building, the type of apartment that you have. Start big and then narrow down as needed. So I think it's important you start by thinking about what's your true needs. Do you need an elevator for health reasons or family reasons? Or maybe you just want to have the convenience of an elevator. What about laundry? Again, do you have kids? I know that there's a lot of laundry involved with having kids. Or are you okay dropping your laundry at the corners and having, or using the laundromat? What about a dishwasher? For some, these are really easy concessions to make in favor of perhaps location, but for others, they can be real deal breakers. So it's important that you determine your non-negotiables and use that as the foundation for your search, recognizing that this list of non-negotiables might need to be a short one. If location is your number one thing and you want to be close to campus, you might have to pull back on some of these other items. And then lastly, when you're thinking about the search process, I want to highlight some tools that I have found really valuable. And again, we'll ask our panelists to talk about the tools that they used. But there are a number of different resources out there in terms of actually searching for an apartment. So Street Easy is the one that I've used most often and I like it because it allows you to filter by a lot of these things. So you can set your budget, you can set your location, you can determine if you want a building with an elevator or a building with a doorman. And narrowing it down by those specific features. This map here is a screenshot I took from a really broad Street Easy search. And so it's, you put in your price and then it'll pop up different neighborhoods. And then you can zoom in and see what apartments are actually available. And so I do find that Des, along with Nooklin, is really popular. Zillow is another source that people use a lot. And then there's Facebook groups. So we will put into the chat the link for an NYU sort of managed Facebook group as well that will help with roommates in addition. So you've done the research, you sort of narrow down your area, what you're looking for, what you sort of want. What are some other things to factor in to think about? Roommates. I think it's no surprise that that's one really great way to save on rent, but then also making some friends in the process. There's typically two ways to go about finding a roommate. Either you connect with someone who has an available room in their apartment. So they might post on the Facebook group or on the NYU off-campus housing platform or some other platform and say, we've got an open room in our apartment. We were looking for someone X, Y, and Z. Reach out if you're interested. And so you might just fall into a group of roommates. Or on the other hand, you connect with another student or another New Yorker or someone else that you happen to know that's moving from home as well. And you start looking for an apartment together. We'll talk more in a bit about specific requirements for international students, but often finding a sublease or moving in with a group of established people already who have a lease can be really helpful in terms of some of those application materials. And to that, preparing your documents. This is the most important thing in terms of being able to actually sign a lease. So before you can apply for an apartment, you need to gather some documents. The exact requirements are going to vary a little bit depending on the exact apartment. But generally speaking, you'll need to provide some version of a proof of income, which we'll talk about in a minute, a government ID or passport. Your letter of acceptance can be really helpful, particularly for international students. If you're working on campus or getting some sort of a scholarship or fellowship from NYU, you should show that as well. Either like a letter of employment from your supervisor, or if you have any other jobs, some sort of letter that shows that you will be getting paid while you're in school. Same goes for scholarship funding letters from an external resource. Anything that shows any form of income is valuable as part of your renter's application. And then if you have it, reference letter from a previous landlord can be a valuable thing as well. One tip is to make sure that your paperwork is all organized into a PDF file in an email or saved on your computer or somewhere that you can access pretty quickly so that you can apply for that apartment. Once you find your dream apartment or find an apartment that looks great, you're able to go ahead and apply right away. I want to spend a minute talking about financial requirements as well, because this is pretty unique to the New York market. Generally speaking, in Manhattan, most parts of Manhattan, landlords will require that you earn about 40 to 50 times the amount of the monthly rent. So if the rent is $1,500 a month, you may need to show that you have approximately $60,000 in annual income. In outlying areas of Manhattan, landlords will require less of that income, somewhere around 30%. But again, it does vary, and roommates or sublets may require less of that annual income as well. Might be thinking, hold on, I'm coming to school, I'm not working full time, I don't have an annual income of $60,000. What do I do? And in that case, there are two options. Most people in that situation will have a guarantor or a co-signer. This is someone who is willing to take the financial liability of your lease if you're unable or unwilling to fulfill it. The guarantor is not generally required to pay anything in order to get you approved. However, they are agreeing to say, yep, if something goes wrong, I will take responsibility for this lease. If you're sharing an apartment, it is important to make it clear that the guarantor is ultimately responsible for the entire lease. And landlords are not required to accept multiple guarantors. So again, this is just something to keep in mind. And something to know that you might be expected to provide. If a landlord is inclined to refuse an application based on poor credit, that could be another case where a guarantor or co-signer could be really helpful based on your own credit. Oftentimes, co-signers or guarantors need to have established credit in the United States. And so again, international students are often asking, how do I get a co-signer for something like this? And there are some companies that provide this service for a fee. And so you could pay to have someone help guarantee your loan or your application. Alternatively, you may be asked to provide additional funding down as a security deposit if you don't have a guarantor or you don't meet those financial requirements. And then also just one thing to keep in mind when you're signing your lease, you'll need access to that money in cash in order to be able to pay for, typically it's a down payment would be, or your security deposit is 1 month's rent plus the first month's rent. So you're essentially paying for 2 months at the beginning. And then at the end of your lease, assuming that you fulfilled the agreements or the terms of your lease, you'll receive your security deposit back or apply it to the last month's rent. But it is important to note that that first payment, when you do apply for that apartment and you're approved and you sign your lease, you may need to pay for 2 months rent at a time. Other things to keep in mind, I know this is a ton of information, and again, you'll get all of this information in a recording. But for those of you who are planning to move to New York for the start of classes in September, I think now is a good time to start thinking about it in terms of narrowing down the neighborhood, getting a sense of what's available to you, what do you really want out of your apartment. But keep in mind that apartment leases are usually signed about 4 to 6 weeks in advance of a move-in date. So if you were hoping to move September 1st, you're not really going to be able to sign a lease tomorrow, which I know can feel a little bit daunting, considering that we're only a couple months out. But remember, things move quickly. There's a lot of apartments in New York. There's a lot of people in New York. So if you don't get that one apartment that you really liked, there's going to be another one that pops up, and keeping that in mind can help you from getting too discouraged. Um, if you're unable to visit New York before classes begin, you may even opt into looking for a short-term rental, such as, well, there's no Airbnbs in New York anymore, but there's other short-term living arrangements where you can stay for a couple of weeks while you are looking for apartments, again, knowing that you'll be able to find something pretty quickly. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that with our panelists in a minute, who some of them moved to New York without being able to come visit. And then the last thing I wanted to do before opening it up to our panel is highlight a newer resource for NYU, which is our off-campus housing portal. This is available to you as a student. Once you have your NetID and your NYU login, you should be able to log in to start your search. And so listed here, there are a number of different apartment listings. Again, not all of them are necessarily vetted by NYU, and we'll talk a little bit about things to be careful of when you're searching for apartments online. But it is a good starting point in terms of, what's out there. Are the people looking for a roommate, which I think this is a really great tool for helping to connect with other NYU students who may need a roommate. Then also this renter's resource section is really valuable in providing links and some information about the things that we talked about in terms of guarantors, websites that are helpful for searching, all of those sorts of things. So while it's a work in progress, it's a great that we have a resource where everything is all in one place. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that. And with that, I would love to ask our panelists to turn on their camera. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we're able to see everybody. And what I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do is take a couple of minutes to introduce themselves. I would love to hear, about your search process. Tell us what program you're in, and share a little bit about what that process looks like for you. Tools that you used, where you live now, how you narrowed down your neighborhood. Do you have roommates? All of that stuff. So I think just based on the order of my screen, I'm going to have Shruti start with her introduction.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Shrishti. I'm doing the Human Resource Management and Development program with the School of Professional Studies. I moved here almost a year ago, and I live in a two-bedroom. So I have one other roommate, and I live in Hamilton Heights, which is a neighborhood within Manhattan. Um, the building itself is a five-floor building, and each floor has, I think, maybe 2 to 3 apartments. So the apartment is pretty small, but I wouldn't say it's too small. We both have a bedroom, we have a small living room, and like a kitchen area. And my commute every day from to Washington Square Park is almost like 40 minutes, but to where I have class, which is in Bryant Park, it is almost like 25 to 30 minutes. So depending on where I have to go, that's the commute. Yeah.
Thanks, Shruti. Next is Toby on my screen.
Hi everyone, I'm Toby. I'm originally from Lagos, Nigeria. I moved to New York like roughly 3 years ago. I was working as an intern for about a year and a half before I started at NYU. I lived actually previously in Bed-Stuy, and now I currently live in Bushwick. It takes me, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't say this, but I'm studying project management at SBS, the School of Professional Studies. But I currently live in Bushwick. I have 2 roommates. We live in a pretty big building in Bushwick. It's like probably one of the bigger ones. My room is extremely small, to be honest with you, but my rent is very fair for the size of my room, and my building kind of makes it up because it has like loads of amenities and loads of fun things to do. So I don't really mind the fact that my room is too small. My commute to Washington Square Park is roughly like 29 minutes from Bushwick. It's like a straight train, which is really nice. The M train, the best train. And my commute to most of my classes, which is in 14th Street, is about 25 minutes as well. So I do really like living in Bushwick. I think it's like very good for young people. There's always loads of things to do, and the commute to most places is like fairly straightforward. So I do think it's like a very nice area to live in. I hope I answered all the questions, Christy.
Yes, you did. Thank you for sharing. I love that your commute was a specific 29 minutes. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
very specific.
Vamsi, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Hi all, my name is Vamsi and I am a grad student at Tandon studying cybersecurity. I live in a neighborhood called Taika Heights, which is towards the south, about 3 miles north of Coney Island. I live in what is called a Brooklyn brownstone, which is a unique house, that you won't find anywhere else. It's essentially a family style home in a very suburban part of New York. My rent is pretty fair, and my neighborhood is actually one of the better ones. Uh, it takes me about 30 minutes to get to the Brooklyn campus, which is where I take my classes from. And it takes me about 40 to 45 minutes, on the express train to the Manhattan campus, which well, during the mornings it's good, but as it turns in the evening, and this frequency of the train start dropping, you gotta worry about it a little. But overall, I'm pretty happy. My neighborhood, we have there's an Italian supermarket right opposite my place, so I don't really need to buy in bulk. Um, there are also a couple of facilities such as there's a laundromat which is about a block away, and there are a lot many restaurants along the avenue where I'm staying. And yeah, for the rent and for the distance from where I'm staying from campus, I have a pretty sweet deal.
Thank you all for sharing. And also that reminded me of another tool that I find useful, not only in this context, but whenever I'm planning a trip somewhere, I utilize Google Street View as well. And so I think if you're not able to come to New York, but you're trying to get a feel for the neighborhood, for example, are there grocery stores on my block? Is there a coffee shop down the street? Dropping the Google person into that neighborhood and kind of literally walking around the neighborhood can give you a good sense of what stores are around, what would the neighborhood feel like? Is there a grocery store right there? Is there a corner bodega? What are those options? So with that, I wanted to ask also if you could all share some of the tools that maybe you used either in finding a roommate, if you have roommates, or finding your apartment. Generally, what tools specifically did you find valuable? Let's start with Toby this time.
So my story is like pretty funny, to be honest, because previously to starting living in Bushwick, where I live currently, I lived in Bed-Stuy because I was working as an intern. And I do think, I just wanted to point this out, but I do think it would be a good resource for everyone to be aware of. It's called Outpost. And it kind of helps with like short-term and mostly like students, so like short-term stays, like if you can guarantee that you're going to be paying rent every month type of thing, you can kind of like say, oh, I can pay rent this month. Next month, I don't think I can live here anymore, and you can leave. Like you're not really tied as strongly to like a year lease. So that was where I lived in Bed-Stuy, and it was fairly affordable, but it's like a shared house that you kind of have a room and you share it with like random people. It was really difficult for me to find a roommate, so that was kind of what I just did when I first came into New York. So I stayed there for like a couple of months for me to get situated. And then I found like a proper place. But where I found my proper place was actually through Instagram. Because I had been in New York for a while, I had been meeting loads of different people. And someone just advertised on the Instagram that they were looking for a roommate. And she had been living in New York. She's a native New Yorker. So I just kind of like strapped on to her leg and just like moved in with her. So that was kind of how I found my place. But before even the Instagram, I used what Christy has spoken about. So Nooklyn, Street Easy, just kind of all of the regular resources that people speak about. But I would also recommend checking out Facebook groups of like new students that also going to NYU. You could possibly find someone that's looking for an apartment and you can like work together with them. Even in the chat that I'm reading currently, the Q&A, there's like people that are advertising that they're looking for roommates. So if you see someone that you think, you would be able to get along with and etc. I think just like kind of shoot your shots and like be very proactive when it comes to housing here. I hope that answered your question.
Definitely. Vamsi or Shrishti, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think,
Absolutely.
oh,
Okay. Is it Shrishti or
Go
Vamsi?
ahead, Vamsi. You go ahead, Vamsi.
All right. Well, I'd like to add 2 points. The first one is, as soon as you receive your acceptance letter, you should be getting an N number on top of it, along with your letter. And using this N number, you can enter the Facebook groups that are hosted by some of the staff here at NYU. In fact, in one of these Facebook groups is where I found my roommate. You know, my roommate had posted out, "Hey, I'm looking for a roommate. Is anyone else up for it?" And I reached out to him, and we were able to, proceed with finding a house together. The second is, if you are in a city where OGS hosts an NYU welcome event, please do go and attend it, because you will be meeting all the other NYU students who will be attending college with you from your city. So this is a fantastic place to network, and as well as meet people who are going to NYU with you, and reach out to them, and you know you that is an entire place filled with potential roommates, so and also friends. And I know many people who I have met in Bangalore, who I'm still in touch with here in New York. uh, Not only does it help with finding houses, as well as attending classes, it's also a place to make friends, and ensures that when you come to New York, you're not on your own. You have other people you can depend on.
Thanks, Vamsi. Shrishti, did you have something to add to that?
no, I think they covered it well.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you. Thank you for sharing those resources. I do think that putting yourself out there sometimes and trying to connect with students in your program, or if you find someone with a shared experience, or you can always just kind of blanket out, tell everybody you're moving to New York. Eventually, someone will know somebody who is looking for a roommate or who lives here or can connect you. I think that's one of the other great things about moving to such a big city, is that New Yorkers are truly kind, and they do look out for each other. So put it out there, let people know that you're moving, and you never know where it'll land. My next question is about that all important money question, because price is such an important factor and something to consider. Can you share a little bit about how you determined your budget, and or talk about your experience with any rent increases? I know rent increases have been in the news lately. It seems a little bit less now than in the last couple of years, but if you'd be willing to share a little bit about that, that would be great. Who wants to start off with this one?
I
Go
don't
ahead,
know.
Toby.
So with pricing, kind of things I factored in, to be very honest with you, I have like family help, just because like Nigeria, my spending capabilities in America is really low. So I really can't pay rent on my own yet. So I have some family help, but as well as that, I was just looking for somewhere where there was a balance between how much I'm paying, my experience, and how like far and how long it takes me to get into the city. So, I wouldn't want to pay something like $2,000 to live like deep in Queens, and it take me like an hour to get to school. Like that was a bit too much for me. I don't mind sharing how much I pay. So my rent currently is 1,200, and I share with two other people. Our price is based on the sizes of our room, and because my room is the smallest, I pay the least. And it's expensive, but not too expensive, to be very honest with you, compared to like what the typical going prices are in New York. But in terms of rent prices, thankfully my flat is rent controlled. So the rent increase is very, very little, if there's any, every year. It's like very negligible. So that's something you could also look out for. Like they're very rare to find a rent controlled, but just seeing if you're able to get it rent controlled, that's like a very, very great added plus when it comes to pricing. And I saw that someone asked me a question on the Q&A about Bushwick and navigating the nighttime in Bushwick. I too have night classes. All my classes end at 9 p.m. I actually didn't have any afternoon classes last semester, sadly. And I would say obviously security and feeling safe is extremely subjective. So it definitely would depend on your experience. But in my personal experience, like I do find Bushwick to be very safe. I come home pretty late almost every day, to be very honest, and I've never really had any issues. And because I've lived in the community for about a year and a half, I kind of have like friends on the road, like just people that sit on the road, and I'm just like, hey, and they're like, hey. So I think it's like a very community-based area, like, and there's, as I said, like a lot of young people. So on the train, even if it's 4 a.m., 2 a.m., no matter the time, there's gonna be someone on the train probably dressed really excitingly where you don't really feel unsafe, at least for me anyway. So I hope that answers the Q&A that I got specifically to me.
Just to give you guys an idea of what my rent looks like. So I live in Hamilton Heights, which is again a neighborhood in Manhattan. I pay like 1,100, and the things that I was looking to before I decided to pay this much. So I live with one other person. We were looking at like amenities that we get within the apartment as well. So we have a washer and dryer. We do live on the fourth floor, which is not the best when moving in and moving out, but we did have a washer and a dryer on our apartment, which is not the most common thing in New York. So we didn't mind doing like the 4 floor walk up to have that. And we also did, I just signed or like I renewed my lease, and we did have an increase, but they're also helping us with like other amenities within the apartment, so we don't really mind the increase. So I would say keep in mind what you are looking to get in your apartment when you are trying to figure out how much you want to pay. So even just around your apartment, so if you there's 5 lines near me, so which is not something that happens for everybody. Some people only have like 1 or 2 lines near them, so I think that's also another reason to why we decided that it's fine if we pay a little bit more just to experience to have all the lines and the connectivity within New York.
Did anyone here? There's a few questions in the chat about brokers' fees and utilizing brokers, and that's not something we've talked about in detail. So generally, just to give a disclaimer, there are companies who are essentially real estate brokers that can help you not only find housing, but also can help with the application process. They do charge a fee, and I don't know their fee structure. I think that probably really varies depending on the broker. But one thing to note is that if you are international, if you're not able to travel to New York, it is helpful to have a person on the ground who's able to help you set up those appointments or can do them virtually. There are apartments that are available only through a broker, and so it does give you some access to additional apartments. Again, but for that fee, I know that there's a big range, and I used to know this information offhand, between like 1 month's rent for the fee or 2 months rent. I think it really varies, but it is a resource that's available. Always, as with everything housing related, do your research to make sure that they're a legitimate company. But I do think that there are benefits to utilizing those services, and they can help you put together those application materials. I saw someone ask, like, can someone review my materials? A broker would help you do that. But I should have noted this earlier, on websites that where you're searching, you're often able to search for no fee apartments, which means that there would not be a broker that's involved in that. So you're not paying that fee. So if anyone has experience with brokers, please share. And then Vamsi, I cut you off, so go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, first off, I'd like to add that the websites that have been mentioned, Nooklin, Street Easy, these are fantastic resources, not only to get an idea of the rent in different areas, but also getting in touch with brokers. So it was actually I completely anecdotal, but it was actually through Street Easy that my roommates and I were able to get in touch with a broker who we reached out to, and he was able to get us a house in the neighborhood that we're staying at, which suited our needs. Furthermore, adding on to the costs that we mentioned, from what I have gathered, with my friends as well as what I'm paying. I would say that if you are planning to stay either in Jersey or in Brooklyn, a good figure to keep in mind would be $1,000. If you're planning on having a separate room for yourself, $1,000 would be the median rent that you can probably look out for. And if you are planning on sharing a room with another roommate, which a lot of my friends here do, $600 to $700 a person is a figure that you can expect.
Great, thank you for sharing. I think that's really helpful. My next question, I was going to ask about documents, but maybe we'll circle back on that. My next question that I want to ask everybody is, what was something that was unique or unexpected about your experience finding housing in New York? Shristi, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, mine's it's a little funny story. So when I moved here, I, like Christy said before, like it's okay for you to not have an apartment in the month. Even I moved here while not having an apartment at all. So my roommate and I, we stayed in um hotels for like the first week and a half just so we could look at apartments. And we even signed an apartment. And after we signed it, she was like, "Oh, I have another apartment that you can take a look at. It's like right in the next building. It's a little bit bigger and it has a washer and dryer." And we'd already signed our stuff at this point. So we were like, "Oh, like we've signed it. There's no point of looking at it." But we were like, "Okay, we'll just go take a look at it. It's on the fourth floor." We went and looked at it, and now that's the apartment that we chose to stay on because it was through the same company, but it was just bigger. So I think don't get afraid if you don't have an apartment right as you're moving in. I think everybody that's coming here, or at least majority of the people that are moving here, face the same issues as you are probably facing. So I think that's an experience that I don't think I was going to have, and I am pretty happy with it now. And I'm glad that we were like, "Oh, let's go take a look at it. It's fine if we've already signed it. There's no harm in taking a look at it." So I think that was it was funny.
You just never know what you're going to find. And
Yeah.
I think it is scary to like have the idea of like, how can I move without a place? But if you're ready to hit the ground running, that's why doing some of this research in advance, so you do feel comfortable when you see an apartment. Like, look, I've done all the research. I know that these are the particular areas that look interesting to me, and this is the budget that I feel comfortable with. It makes it so much easier that when you see that apartment, that you say, you know what, yes, here's my application. I'm interested in living here. So thanks for sharing that. Bonzi, do you have what's something unique or anything unexpected that you found about your experience?
Yes, so it wasn't my experience, but it was the experience of my best friend. He was able to find his apartment because a senior who was living in his place was graduating at that particular time. So another way, well, it's not exactly advice, but it is something that you can definitely look out for, is you could probably go on LinkedIn and see, NYU students who are maybe graduating during either the spring or the summer, and you can reach out to them and see if they are leaving a particular property, or if they know somebody who is graduating and looking to sublease their apartment. Uh, this is one way, and another thing is there are also a couple of WhatsApp groups where people regularly post subleases. I think you should, once you join these Facebook groups, you'll automatically be uh, allowed into the WhatsApp groups. Just keep that in mind. Uh, there are many different ways to finding a house. There's no hard and fast rule. Just keep your options open, and yeah, just go with the flow. Don't worry about it. You'll find one eventually.
Abby, anything you want to add?
Um, yeah, I think with housing, it can be, honestly, in New York, it can be really funny, and like you can just stumble upon like a really great place. So my experience, as I said, like I was in an outpost building for a bit after my internship ended, and I was like kind of looking for where to stay to continue to stay in the US. So I was an outpost and I was doing the co-living situation with a few people, which wasn't fun, but it really was helpful because it was like slightly on the more affordable side because I was in Ridgewood, which is a bit deeper into Brooklyn slash the border of Queens. So it was really helpful to just be able to do that and have my stuff somewhere whilst I was searching for a place. But as I said earlier on, how I ended up finding the place was on Instagram through a friend that was looking for a roommate. And the place ended up being like so amazing in terms of the number of amenities. Like it has a pool, like a really nice rooftop that has like a barbecue and all these kind of nice things. And as I said, like I only pay 1,200 for all of those amenities. So it was really, really exciting to be able to like go from like living with people that I didn't know in like a really, really, really small space to like living in such a really lovely building. So like just my advice is just keep trying. Don't be discouraged and try as much as you can to, as Vamsi said, like put yourself out there. Don't feel embarrassed to reach out to people on LinkedIn or even on Instagram. Like if you see that they have like NYU in their bio, like just follow them, DM them, like get some thoughts from them and just see like where it can take you because you could end up living in like a very, very nice place for very affordable because New York is really big. And even though the reputation is like everywhere, it's like really expensive and all of this, like there's actually really pockets of like really, really amazing apartment buildings specifically that like fairly affordable and you can like be close to like my building, for example, has a grocery store in the building and a coffee shop in the building. So you could find like something like that where you're not paying like a leg and an arm for. So that's my advice.
Sounds like we're all moving in with Toby. So we've got just a little bit of time left. So I'm gonna buzz through some of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat and a few that were upvoted. A question particularly about using student loans as income and whether or not landlords pull credit checks on guarantors. Those are specific questions that I'm not totally confident in answering. I think that yes, you can use your loans as proof of income. So that is a piece of it. In terms of the type of credit check that they pull on guarantors, I'm not entirely sure. But that is something that you could always ask the landlord, obviously, but then it also could be worth reaching out to some of these companies that do serve as guarantor companies and just asking for the process. They may be willing to chat with that. And we'll also look to see if we can find a little bit any more information on that. And then the question, if I have a roommate, does my guarantor only cover my share of rent or the entire rent of the apartment? So that's the piece where a landlord does not have to accept two guarantors. It's not required by law that they do. And so if it's a situation where they will only accept one guarantor, then that guarantor would have to cover the whole apartment. So both shares of the rent. So that's also something to keep in mind. There were also a few questions about paperwork, particularly as it pertains to subletting, but also information that NYU needs as part of the visa process. So questions on that, as well as some other international student related questions. So I'm going to drop in the chat the website to our Office of Global Services. They have a website specifically for newly admitted students. And I believe there's some information there about moving to New York, finding apartments, some of those more nuanced things that are particular and specific to the international student experience. They also tend to have info sessions and webinars throughout the summer. So keep your eye on that website for that. Also seeing some questions about the housing Facebook page. I'm going to reach out to the office that manages that page to see if they're still managing it. And if they're not, then that would explain why people aren't getting access. And if they are, maybe a little nudge will get them to approve you. But in the meantime, I encourage you to go to the off-campus housing portal. I think NYU is trying to move away from managing Facebook and utilizing that portal more specifically. So make sure you sign up for an account there, start reaching out to people. I think Vamsi's suggestion to reach out on LinkedIn is a valuable one. And then also connecting with your program. Each program, department, school, college manages things a little bit differently in terms of how you're able to connect with other incoming students. But if there are resources, don't hesitate to reach out to your program and ask if there's a WhatsApp group, is there a Facebook page for your program, because connecting with students that way is as well is really valuable. And if someone's graduating, taking over a lease, that's another great way to sort of slide in the back door. I do think it's important, and I want to put the disclaimer out that if you are taking over a sublet, it's important that you're able to sign a lease document to protect yourself, whenever possible. And those things to keep in mind. One more reminder, you will receive a recording after today's event. All right, I'll keep looking through some of those other last minute questions, and big kudos to our event staff who have been typing furiously to try to get to all those questions. So thank you all. As we wrap up, my last question is things you wish you knew before you started your housing search process. Is there a particular tip that you found really valuable, or just any general parting advice? So Vamsi, we'll start with you, and then Toby, and then we'll end with you, Shristi.
All right, that's a good question, Christy. I think a lot of people, especially those who have never experienced snow before, I do have advice for you. When you're finding a place, make sure that that place is about just 2 blocks away from the nearest subway station. Because it's okay during summer, fall, and spring, but come winter, you don't want to be spending your time outside walking. So make sure that the place that you're looking at is at least at most 2 blocks away from a subway station. And I did see a couple of questions on where to live. So this is a question that cannot be answered because every neighborhood is its own thing. But what I would say is that if you are attending college in Brooklyn, that is in NYU Tandon, you probably could start looking for places in Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights, Sunset Park, around the areas just to the south of it, along the coast. Because not only do you have the one straight subway line, that is the R line, uh, the rents also are affordable, and the further you go away, the cheaper it gets. So there's going to be a trade-off between distance and cost. You can make a decision however you see fit.
Thanks, Vamsi. And I just have one more. This is sort of a tip and a question that I don't want to forget. Tips for signing a lease that's could be potential spam. What I'll say on that is if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. If you've seen that same photo on multiple listings, if the price is really low compared to what you seem to be getting, if you're not able to get a contact person or number or email, all of those sort of red flags, if you get any icks about any of it, take a step back. It's probably too good to be true. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule, but if it seems like it's amazing, just do a little bit more research. All right, Toby, any closing thoughts?
For me, I would say I think like just all of the tips that Christy gave in regards to like knowing kind of what you want and knowing like it's very difficult for you to find a place if you actually don't even know what your requirements kind of are. And New York is really interesting because like almost every area, it's like its own little interesting community. So for me, I always knew I wanted to live in Bushwick just because I really like I love thrifting, I really like the area and I love the nightlife there. And it's not too far from everywhere. So Bushwick was like the #1 place on my list, but that's obviously like specific to me. So I feel like making a list of kind of what you want is in washer dryer, like hard and fast, like for you, then put that on your list and like just make sure you have your non-negotiables, because once you sign that lease, you can't really go back on it. I mean, you could sublease if they allow that, but it's a very, very important decision. So I would definitely say try as much as you can to make a well-informed decision when you can. And I see a lot of people asking for like just the average prices of like a 1 bedroom or a 2 bedroom. And I just wanted to say like it kind of really depends on what area you decide to live in. I personally, if you don't want to go on the higher side, as Christy said, like stay away from like Greenwich Village area and like very close to campus, which is sad, but very close to campus is like on the expensive side. I personally really like Brooklyn. Harlem is also pretty affordable. And like the typical price I would say for a 1 bed is probably on the higher side. If you can share, to save money, try and find a roommate. But if you can't, then just, be expectant of what you likely would be paying, which should probably be, above like 1,750. That's even like a good, extremely good deal of 1,750. So just kind of like put all those like things into mind. But as the native New Yorker said, like it seems a lot more stressful than it actually ends up being. And once you're in the place that you get, like I'm sure everyone is going to get a good place that they want to live in and enjoy it.
Christy, any last words?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything they've said. I think one of the main things that I was looking for was connectivity. So nowhere, depending on where I was staying, I wanted to make sure that I had a couple lines near me so that I could get places just to like explore the city or just like to school, to work, to things like that. I think making that list really helps out. And also think that doing this, if you're not in New York, which I wasn't in New York either, while I was looking for apartments, the street view option really helps out to see what's nearby your area, what you can, like grocery stores, just like other like restaurants, food, coffee shops, like just in general, you can take a look at everything. So I think that's another tool that I made huge use of while I was looking for a place.
Thank you. I know we're just over time. I want to give a huge thank you to our panelists for sharing their experiences. For everyone who joined today, congratulations on your acceptance if you're joining the NYU community. And I really want to appreciate and say thank you to the New Yorker who put in the question. You'll find housing. Good luck. It's the best place to live. And thank you all for joining. We appreciate it. Again, you will receive a recording after today's session. You will also, in that email, you can respond to our office if you have any additional questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. We'll hang on for just a few more minutes to try to answer any last questions. But thank you all so much again, and have a great rest of your day.